person in the world. Thank you very much for your introductory words, Aliash. Welcome all on my behalf. Many topics were raised during today's conference. Amongst others, we touched upon the American approach towards political foundations and the necessary political changes, the role of political foundations and think tanks. Especially during the previous panel, we learned about the Estonian experience, the Dutch experience, and Croatian experiences, as well as German experiences. And now it is time to say a few things about political foundations in Slovenia. We will take a look at the draft on political foundations in Slovenia, and we will listen to the explanation what are the problems encountered by those who work in this field. Whenever I speak with those heading such organizations, I hear that political foundations are not often enough on the agenda of discussions and that political solutions are indispensable for their status. So first of all, let us listen to Mrs. Renata Zadler, the State Secretary Act on Political Foundations in Slovenia. Thank you very much. Welcome all. On behalf of the Ministry of the Interior, the draft act is undergoing the second reading in the Parliament. The procedure has been partly carried out, and now we are trying to harmonize the draft between different parties, opposition parties, but also between the coalition parties who are giving their amendments to the act. I will speak about the current draft as it is now, as it was submitted to the Parliament. The aim of this act is to create additional mechanisms that will be able to ensure greater transparency for the funding of political parties. Public access will be granted to the annual reports of political parties. This will be possible through the IPAS portal. We will create a system whereby the political parties will send their annual reports to just one site. And thus we will create a simple procedure and at the same time ensure public access to those annual reports. We will enhance the supervision over the fulfillment of requirements, and we will also strengthen the sanctions for violations of the Act, in line with the recommendations of GRECO issued in 2007. It is high time that certain changes are implemented in our legislation. With regard to individual solutions proposed in the draft, I will not go into detail with regard to that, but I would like to stress certain important regulations. This draft prohibits financing of political parties by all individual entrepreneurs and commercial companies and all those performing their own business, which means that donations to the parties could be given only by the individuals. And of course, political parties will receive also funding from the budget. Criteria for funding from the budget will be changed. 25% of these funds will be distributed to the parties in equal shares, while the rest will be distributed in line with the share obtained by the party at the elections. This financial plan will be adopted by the Parliament, and all other contributions by the parties will have to be distributed for charity purposes. in line with the Act on Charity Organizations. This draft act also defines a more detailed composition of annual reports, tasks, and obligations of political parties to present their business operations. And what is also important is the disclosure of data on donations. If the donations are higher than the average wage of Slovenia's employees. So if the donation exceeds this amount, the name of the donator will have to be publicly available. It will have to be published. The procedure will be simplified for the procedure for the submission of annual reports. Up until now, they had to be sent to the Parliament, whereas now they will be sent to the Public Agency for Public Finance. The draft also gives competence to the Court of Auditors to implement audits and to require further support documentation and also to have access into business documentation, and thus we hope to strengthen the supervision of parties' business operations. It will also be possible to suspend public financing for a year or half a year if the party will be recognized as seriously violating legal provisions and legal requirements. Fines will be also defined for individual infringements and non-compliances, and fines will be pronounced by the District Court of Ljubljana. And now I would like to say a few words about political foundations and their organization, having in mind that the topic of today's discussion and roundtable discussion is the future of political foundations and their status in the future. Currently, Slovenian legislation does not have a specific legislative act on political foundations. Political foundations are governed by the Act on Foundations in general, whereas on the European level, the European foundations are governed by the Regulation on Political Parties. Any physical person or legal entity can create or set up a foundation as long as the purpose of its activity is a charity purpose. Foundations can receive donations, and the Foundations Act do not prevent direct financing from political parties, but the new Political Foundations Act, however, does contain this provision that foreign legal entities cannot finance political foundations. The EU regulation has been mentioned several times today. It governs the financing of political parties at the European level and also contains several other details on the construction and organization of political foundations. I would like to proceed with the conclusions. A political foundation could obtain funding for the education of party members. However, this would be completely prohibited in the new regulation, in the new act. Political foundations will not be able to finance political parties. We do believe that political foundations should not be governed by the Political Parties Act, and that a new act should be adopted if necessary. And financing rules would have to be clearly defined. I believe that today's debate will contribute to this general discussion. Conclusions from this conference will be taken into account when drafting amendments to the existing legislation. But as I have mentioned, the Foundations Act, the Associations Act, and other legal bases enable us to be active also in the field of political foundations, even though we don't have a specific act for that. Of course, it would be possible to encourage political foundations also through the soft measures, through the tenders intended for other contents and measures. I think this is also the case of other member states where foundations as such are not organizational units governed by a specific act. But of course, I will be eager to listen to my colleagues who will speak after me. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. We will continue with this debate later on, the debate on the draft act and how many times political foundations are mentioned in this act. And now I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Uroš Gruden, the General Secretary of the Zarespa so far. Thank you very much. This was a very good starting point, especially when you spoke about the reason behind the legislative basis in Slovenia. I represent a small non-parliamentary party, and you may not know me, but I've been politically active since 1989. And I've followed the creation of most of the parties that have been established through time. Political foundations in Slovenia are a fact. They started to mushroom with the first creation of the first political parties with a small delay. But as has been said, no special legislation governs political foundations. The practice was that all the major political parties created their own versions of political foundations. The parties adapted these foundations to their own needs. Certain foundations had the form of an association, others were called societies, others again were called institutes, so we had different forms. Some were more popular than others. I do not want to be critical, especially as I am not a legal person. But when we studied the draft Political Foundations Act, or to be more specific, the existing Act on Foundations, we saw that we speak about a specific form of foundations. Mostly these are charity foundations, just like elsewhere in Europe, and they are established to manage a certain property. In my opinion, a Political Foundations Act is indispensable. We spoke about my colleague Pico at great length about this, and we established that it will be very instructive to listen to the experience of our European colleagues. And it is possible to see various models. The time is right for us to be having these talks. And this conference is a proof of that. But our initiative was a bit too late. perhaps a month too late. Why? Because the political parties draft act is already in the parliamentary procedure, as well as the act on referendum and election campaigns. These are two legislative acts, two drafts that are already in the parliamentary procedure. And with my colleagues, we spoke about the necessity to have a threefold package, legislative package, that will really cover the political culture and the needs of the political culture in Slovenia. In 2009, when our party was a coalition party, we were already very active in terms of these changes, and regardless of the funny times we find ourselves in, our ministry decided to put forward these changes, and I commend the ministry for that. In my opinion, however, the proposal is not ambitious enough. I'm not trying to say that the Political Parties Act is not ambitious enough. I'm just saying that we could make further steps forward. Of course, you need to take into account the majority opinion. There is no guarantee that the drafts currently proposed will really be adopted and approved at the end of the day. But we are pleased that the ministry took into account the majority of our recommendations from 2009. But it is really a pity that we have missed the train to deal with these issues in parallel, because such legislative acts are not often amended. It is true that things need to mature. But we are now in 2013, and the time is right. Like the previous speaker said, we welcome the changes when it comes to limitations of financing for political parties and political campaigns. It is also true that the new draft envisages better control and higher sanctions. That is very important. But in terms of substance, we could do more. We could be more ambitious. So why is the legislative base for political foundations so important? For several reasons. In Article 1 of the Political Parties Act, it says that political parties is an association of citizens who strive to fulfill their common goal by selecting their own candidates who will present them at the elections. And that is the only article of substance. All the other provisions, all the other articles are penal provisions and so on, procedural provisions. Today we heard about best practice examples of our partners, foundations across Europe. We've listened to their experience. And of course, there is a very important link between political foundations and political parties. But the situation in Slovenia is, as was mentioned before, and our colleague Mr. Gennaro in the previous panel also said that in Croatia the political parties are at the bottom of popularity when it comes to public opinion, and it's the same situation in Slovenia. Political foundations have often been target of the same approach as political parties. Their status was put under question, their financing, potential overflow of funds from the foundations to the parties, potential financing of political election campaigns from or by the political foundations. But, well, political foundations do have a slightly better reputation than political parties. But nevertheless, it is difficult to start a serious debate on how to regulate the matter or these matters appropriately. I was very surprised to see, for instance, that in Germany they don't have a Political Foundations Act. Through history, through constitutional court rulings, through different agreements that were signed, political foundations simply gained the status that they have today. In other European countries, the status of political foundations is different. They don't even have that. So what is the key substantial or program reason why we need political foundations? I'm a very practical person. And I see that political foundations work differently from political parties. A political party is an operational organization, an executive organization who takes care of the implementation of different policies, takes care of its membership. But there are very few political parties in Slovenia. So there are very few of them that have a think tank amongst its organization, in its structure, embedded in its structure. But political foundations deal with training, with policy definition, international relations, what we do today, about organization of events, all those things that political parties don't do, human resource management, and so on. And here I see a key opportunity. We all know what has been going on over the past 2 or 3 terms of mandate of the parliament. 15% of MPs experienced difficulties of different kind over the past years, also because they did not undergo procedures that are indispensable. Certain deputies became deputies by pure luck or by coincidence. This all results in a lack of political culture. If I look left and right from me, I see that the issue of political culture is of crucial importance. And political foundations are indispensable if we want to raise political culture in Slovenia to a better extent that it was done in the past. Perhaps I repeat myself, but I think we should regulate financing. This is an issue that is very important for the public opinion, and we should also make a cross-section through what is going on in Europe. As a rule, political foundations are financed by donations, direct subsidies, and from the budget, and on the basis of tenders for projects. But here I see a problem. Before it was said that perhaps we don't need a Political Foundations Act at all, but here I see a crucial moment where we can really speak at length about these issues. Political foundations are not classical civil society organizations. They are not political parties either. They are somewhere in between. That is why the competencies should be better divided. For instance, I don't know what would happen if a political foundation sent its application to a tender that is strictly meant for NGOs. What would happen then? Would it be eligible for funds or not? So we need a framework, a solid framework for political foundations so that their destiny will not be the same as the destiny of political parties in Slovenia. So the moment is right, and I will conclude with that. But I should also mention the following. A very important change will be embedded in the new Political Parties Act, because in Slovenia, parties receive dotations or funds from the budget on the basis of the elections results. And additional funds are granted through the parliament. So the groups of parliamentary MPs receive additional funding from the parliament. But with the new act, there will be no overflow between these two sources, financial sources. So the question arises, where will we be able to find new sources for financing something that smells of politics, so to speak? So it is necessary for us to say this is a political financial source. We will define criteria to distribute funds available and earmarked for the financing of political foundations. We have heard the example from Germany, how political results from the previous 4 years are taken into account, and thus we will be able to find the right solution. And we won't need additional funding, additional sources of funding. We just have to take better advantage of the existing funds to redefine the criteria and to allow all parties to receive such funding. I do believe that without further public debate, it is possible to settle the whole matter in a very elegant way. I will conclude by saying that it will be hard to convince me that this matter cannot be regulated, that an act is not necessary. It is necessary.
No, kot ste sami dejali, vsega ena omemba je v tem predlogu, ampak je državna sekretarka razložila, da mislijo, da ta razprava o političnih fundacijah, če že zasluži ali pa bi naj bila urejena v posebnem zakonu. Sami ste dejali, da ste poskušali to, ko ste bili v vladi, sprovesti, speljati. Kaj so bile tiste glavne ovire, da to do zdaj, ker vemo, da politične fundacije niso od včeraj. Kaj so ponavadi bili tisti, ne vem, ali očitki, ali minusi, da se to do zdaj ni zgodilo, po vašem?
Zdaj, jaz bom rekel tukaj biti pravzaprav mogoče malo bolj natančen, kot si bil prej, ne? Takrat smo se znotraj, bom rekel, tako imenovane Pahorjeve vlade, ne pogovarjali. Mislim, da je, če se ne motim,
At that time, we had a debate within Pahor's government, and there was a big problem. When it comes to the Political Foundation Act, we had a big ambition, but it was not realistic for this act to be achieved. And you know what happened? The government was recalled, and we didn't have a serious debate about political foundations. So for that reason, nothing happened at the time, at the political level. Very well, our next speaker, President of the Board from the Dr. Jože Pučnik Institute, Dr. Bernard Brščič. I believe that we will hear that when it comes to political foundations, this is an area which needs to be regulated. And thank you. Allow me to bid you a warm welcome on behalf of the Dr. Jože Pučnik Institute. I am a president of the board. Dr. Jože Pučnik is a person who all in Slovenia know a lot. And when it comes to foreign guests, this is one of the fathers of Slovene state. He was a dissident, and for his beliefs, for his idea, he paid a very high price in the then Yugoslavia. And one of our missions within the Dr. Jože Pučnik Institute is also to preserve his legacy of thought and mentality. And when it comes to our mission, we start from Pučnik's finding, which was also articulated well by Mr. Gruden, namely that democracy needs political culture. Our institute is trying very hard to raise the level of political culture in Slovenia. And we want to make sure that democracy is not just a technical method to determine who might be in the government, but in order to have real democracy, we need a lot more. Namely, we need informal institutions, and we also need to raise awareness. We need to have active citizens. And those citizens should be aware of their responsibility. This responsibility doesn't end every 4 years, once they cast their votes. If I briefly represent the structure and mission of our institute, which was established in 2006, so we are a relatively young institution. We were founded as an association, or rather as a group of artists, intellectuals, professionals, experts, including politicians, coming from different walks of life. And we want to raise the level of political culture in Slovenia. As for our values, we have the following starting points: positive evaluation and assessment of Slovenia's independence. Then we have a positive attitude towards our homeland. Then our belief is also that Slovenia is part of European political and cultural environment. We advocate open, relaxed Slovenia, which has its place within the European community of nations. And of course, we try to bring together all different cultural, political, scientific European groups, which have their starting points in democracy and open society. As for our organization, we follow the Institutes Act. Institutionally, our structure is as follows. We have the Board Institute Council. I am the president. We have 10 members. We also have the Executive Management Board and the director. We have a female director. If I now proceed and start talking about our activities, we have several layers of our activities. One of the most important activities is to organize the so-called Pučnik Days. They take place every year in April. We have a 2-day event. We started in 2007. We then talked about culture and politics. Then every year we made an attempt to address burning issues in our society, be it economic, political, and other items confronted by Slovenia and also Europe. As for last year, i.e. 2013, Pučnik's Days wanted to highlight Pučnik's tradition, Pučnik's legacy, and to see how his activities are relevant for today and tomorrow of Slovenia. In addition, we also have a monthly event, Pučnik's Evenings. We try to invite relevant and renowned interlocutors, and they discuss problems in terms of policy, economy, foreign policy, culture. In a nutshell, this is a well-established practice of communication with our target group. Part of our activities are also festivities, solemnities, celebrations. A very important event was the Honorary Academy commemorating the 20th anniversary of the establishment of Demos. This was democratic opposition, which marked the transition from the totalitarian social order into a liberal democratic order. We also cooperate with similar institutes, and we commemorate, for example, the Europe-wide Remembrance Day for the victims of all totalitarian regimes. One of our main guests, keynote speaker, was Boris Pahor and Jože Trontel, a member of the academia. And of course, I cannot overlook our publishing activities. Partly we publish conference proceedings from Puchnik's days, and partly on your right-hand side you can see that we also have thematic publications addressing burning issues in our society. And of course, we cannot fail to mention the reprint of collected works by Dr. Jože Pučnik. Last but not least, a very important activity of our think tank are political initiatives. I would like to especially refer to two initiatives. On the one hand, we elaborated a vision 20+20. We invited a group of intellectuals, not only our collaborators from the Institute, but we included many interesting individuals, and a very interesting document was published. It addresses the future of the Slovenian state, and what is even more interesting is another phenomenon, namely the initiative How to Reset Slovenia. As a starting point, we used this initiative and it was launched by our institute, but consequently, it also led to the establishment of a new party called the Citizens List. In 2011, when we had parliamentary elections, it should, in fact, lead to a liberal breakthrough. When it comes to political technology, we can say that this project was the success story. The party qualified to the parliament. Unfortunately, when it comes to implementation these liberal ideas into practice, I can say that this is a typical political abortion. So this was a very interesting idea in practice. This was some sort of a spin-off of a new generation, but ultimately this spin-off was not adequate and it was not successful. Nevertheless, I believe that such initiatives can be very interesting and can represent a very important aspect when it comes to the operation of think tanks, so that you do not limit your activities to merely philosophy, but you really make an attempt to use political technology and you try to effect changes in the world. Then, we are also well aware of our limitations when it comes to political context in Slovenia. One of the most deprived groups in our society, which is marginalized, and I'm speaking about the youth. Therefore, within the Institute, we formulated two initiatives and two programs. First, Think Freely. This is our program. This is a civil society initiative. And we follow political objective. Namely, we want to improve political participation. We want to raise political awareness of the youth. We also want to liberalize mental models of the youth. In particular, we want to try to address young people and to tell them that freedom at the same time also means responsibility. And another and different idea, which also addresses the youth, is the so-called network of ideas. It has a broader appeal. We focus on the entrepreneurial element And our starting point is that entrepreneurship competencies are in fact the key to success for Slovenia. On account of unfavorable business environment and on account of lack of ideas, we lack such entrepreneurship spirit, and therefore our initiative formulated this idea, and we want to promote entrepreneurial competencies of the young people. As far as international cooperation is concerned, our institute is a member of the Center for European Studies, which is the foundation of the European People's Party. We are also a member of the European Network of Political Foundations. And also, we are a member of the European Ideas Network. Together with the Center for European Studies, the European Network of Ideas is supported by the EPP. Naturally, we also cooperate with other foundations, such as the Atlas Foundation from the US. In a nutshell, how do we see the future of the Jože Pučnik Institute? We believe that this is a key element for the development of the political parties of the Slovenian spring. This is a key aspect if we want to confront ideas. Our starting point is that politics is not merely a conflict between different interests. It's not just a problem of managing public affairs, but to a large extent, politics is also determined by ideas, by ideologies and related issues. And here we see a very specific role of the Institute of Political Foundations, similar to our institution. And I believe that we should focus on entrepreneurship of ideas. If I quote Hayek, we are second-hand dealers in ideas. We make an attempt to transfer certain ideas into the Slovene political sphere. When it comes to this entrepreneurship of ideas, this has been highlighted by Mr. Gruden as well. We face with unpleasant business environment. This doesn't merely go for Slovenia, but we also have generally unpleasant political environment. The political structure, institutional structure of the Slovenian state is not in favor of such institutions such as ours. I would like to refer to one problem, i.e. funding. And this is a burning issue, especially now, in times of a serious economic crisis. This crisis affected Slovenia profoundly. For that reason, if we had better circumstances economically, these funds should be provided by the economy. However, such funds are missing as we speak. And then there is also another problem, unregulated environment in terms of legislation when it comes to funding deputies group within the parliament. This issue has already been raised. This area is hyper-regulated. The hypothesis being that political foundations and think tanks are parasites, and they make an attempt to fill private pockets, to channel funds. Whoever is involved in the entrepreneurship of ideas knows very well that this is far from being the truth. However, our constitutional order in Slovenia currently, and as I see from what we heard today, So this preliminary draft, which is being proposed, doesn't foresee any changes taking place. In other words, we will preserve the environment which doesn't promote political foundations. And then, how to find a solution? I believe that we have several options. On the one hand, we can adopt a special act regulating political foundations. I would be very skeptical to this solution because the last thing this state needs at present is the institutional pollution by way of new legislation. And another solution improving flexibility within legislation, improving funding possibilities. On the one hand, we should improve political party funding and funding of deputy groups within the parliament. And then we could also have possibilities for funding political foundations. The present situation is very rigid, and it prevents any possibility for normal operations of such political foundations. If we consider the current state of affairs in Slovenia, we should reflect on how to make a transition to the US model of funding of think tanks. However, in my opinion, this borders on utopia. Or this is in fact madness. It is impossible to make such a transition within a short period of time. The funding of the Slovenian economy is so limited at present that currently I do not see any possibility to make this quantum leap. And when it comes to costs, it is my estimate that all political foundations in the state of Slovenia in total do not exceed the amount of 750,000 euros.
Ki bi to državo potopile, hkrati sem pa prepričan, da bi neka razumna rešitev, ki se strinjam tu z gospodom Grudnom, sploh ne bi nujno za seboj potegnila večje obremenjevanje javnih sredstev, se pravi, da bi z neko razumno prerasporeditvijo z toga denarja, ki se v tem trenutku namenja na eni strani delovanju političnih strank, na drugi strani poslanskih skupin, lahko z istimi sredstvi v bistvu dosegli večji učinek, ker pričakovati, da v tej zagadni javnofinančni situaciji lahko od davkoplačevalcev zahtevamo dvigovanje zdaj nekih javnih sredstev za delovanje političnih fundacij, je precej nerealno. Hvala.
Hvala lepa, magister Brščič. Ena stvar mi je padla v uho, pa jo opažam pri mnogih, ki delujejo v političnih fundacijah ali ki razmišljajo o tem. Velika večina zelo poudarja to nujnost distanciranja od političnih strank. Vi ste recimo omenil, ko ste naštevali, kdo sodeluje pri ustvarjanju inštituta, ste tako posebej dodal in tudi člani političnih strank, oziroma.
Če pogledam,
Sprašujem zaradi tega, ker jaz sem vrsto let živela v Združenih državah in so te stvari tam zelo jasne in nihče se od njih ne distancira. So zelo think tanki, levi, desni, sredinski in kar je še vsega, ampak se ve, na katerem think tanku bo katero od visokih politikov iz katere od političnih strank. Zdaj pa pri nas pa imajo politične stranke.
Political parties have a very low rating in the public. Is this the reason why you are distancing yourselves from these political parties? When it comes to organizing roundtables, you know very well who will be invited, from which parties. I fully agree with you. I'm not distancing myself from anyone. I will be quite clear in saying that the Dr. Jože Pučnik Institute belongs to the Slovenian Spring political party group. We sympathize, we are affiliated with the Slovene Democratic Party, but we do not limit ourselves. I have to say that when it comes to substance, we need to have this substance-based approach. And I have to say that I was very pleased that Sebastian invited me to attend this round table, because in fact this breaks and moves away from this political party approach. In this way, we will raise political culture, and this also means that you can sit around the same table with a person, although you do not share the same ideological views. Yet, if your starting point is that you are a Democrat, and that this also entails that you are able to think rationally, to engage in rational discourse, this in fact is the first step. But however, it is also correct that we distance ourselves too much from certain political group. I will not do that. I will not engage in value-based neutrality. I will not say that we are neutral, independent. Of course, every individual is, ethically speaking, a person who has certain views. We live in a moral world, and it is impossible to draw clear distinction between facts and values. For that reason, ideologies play a very important role. In that respect, as you have said, in Slovenia we need to follow the US model, and the experience you have shared with us is quite telling in that respect. It is nothing wrong in the US to know that if you have a Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, Liberty Fund, they represent, for example, more or less the Republican electorate. But what matters, however, when it comes to raising political culture, is that you are, in fact, capable to sit around the same table with Sebastian, to have coffee together, to talk, and not to kill one another. This is the essence of democracy. I fear, however, that when it comes to Slovenia, we have a long way ahead in terms of raising political culture. This discourse at the political party level is impossible because of this division between political parties. Why? I believe that political foundations can make this step forward. We can do a lot more than political parties when it comes to political dialogue. Sebastian, a member of the Institute Novum, were you invited by the Dr. Jože Pučnik Institute? Did you attend any of their events? No, we haven't been invited as guests, but on a number of occasions I came to their events and they sent invitations on a regular basis. This is Sebastian Picker, who is director of the Novum Institute, an excellent organizer of similar events. It would be interested to hear about your experience.
Nataša, hvala za besedo.
Thank you, Natasha, for giving me the floor. How to kickstart this presentation? Mr. Brščić is a traditional economic liberal. In that respect, I think he's the right person for this panel. We will not kill one another, but probably we will speak the same language when it comes to different topics. Anyhow, my purpose was to present our operations of the Novum Institute after we were established 6 years ago, but I will go beyond that and present new views. We have 60, 70, or even 90% of funds for political parties, and the majority of funds are earmarked for elections. And this is funds used for propaganda. Propaganda, which is in fact part of the story we try to sideline, in fact, to marginalize it and try to focus on contents. Part of this propaganda also focuses on what in Slovenia for 10 years we have been hearing and promoting charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders in Slovenia are something which in fact drives forward political parties and movements. And this is one thesis which I learned at school, at the university. Political parties are only organizations in the political arena which compete. What does this mean? They are the only organizations competing and organizing society. They set priorities and they say how public funds will be reallocated and earmarked. On the one hand, we have a huge amount of funding invested in every election campaign, and in between, it also focuses on electorate propaganda, which is populistic, and sometimes it is also nationalistic. On the other hand, we do not earmark any funds, although I don't have research backing my claim, but I believe that only 5% of funding is earmarked for what should be the basic mission of political parties, namely to develop ideas and to develop society in the future. And this is the main difference, the essence. And I believe that we should address these issues here today. As it has been mentioned by Uroš, political foundations exist in Slovenia for quite some time. Ideas or wishes were voiced here that we should follow the US model of political foundations, but I believe that we follow the European model. Why? Because we share specific political and cultural aspects. We have the same context in the Southeast Europe. And on the other hand, because EU models are well established and known in Slovenia. For that reason, they have 3 or 4 main pillars. And I made a distinction previously. And what will be the added value of the new act is to have greater transparency when it comes to political party funding. This is highly desirable because this was a problem in the past. My basic premise was that the large amount of funding is earmarked for propaganda. Political foundations, on the other hand, are established, they operate, yet they lack regular source of funding. And this funding is not transparent. As Dr. Brščić was mentioning earlier, they are portrayed as corrupt foundations, semi-corrupt foundations. This, in fact, is the structure we should avoid, and we should move beyond. The purpose of today's conference is to make an attempt to change the discourse of our discussions, to move away from individuals to the field of ideas in policies. The field of ideas is something I will try to briefly represent. So what we are doing within the Novum Institute, within the...
ker sem rekel, da so politični...
As I have said, political foundations are their own breed. We have been formulated from practical experience in Slovenia, and similar to Dr. Jože Pučnik, we have a certain notion when it comes to certain structures which are needed in order to have a very successful organization of political activities. So the promotion and elaboration of ideas. I therefore speak about political foundation and think tanks. I will briefly go through basic pillars of our activities. And what are our basic pillars? We have been trying to set up by funding in Slovenia and with the help of our European political foundations and through projects. On the one hand, political training, political party members, we cooperate at the local, regional and national levels, then the promotion of ideas. I will speak about 3 most important conceptual events organized by the Institute at the international level with the help of the European Liberal Forum, social entrepreneurship, universal basic income, and now the conference on political foundations. Then the work which should be done and it should be emphasized, but also it calls for extensive resources. This is policy analysis. This is a long-term perspective. Presenting arguments, articulating ideas, elaborating political texts which are available to political decision makers. Just briefly, I described and defined the concept of think tanks and political foundations. But you heard a lot about that today. I will not dwell on that. As I have said, the Institute Novum was established in 2008. Our 4 basic activities where we operate are as follows. We organize campaigns. We present different contents. Then we are involved in policy analysis. We promote value-based activities and we cooperate internationally. We organized several events, but we think that when it comes to international events, it is important to have a certain impact. How it should be measured? Not just to have politicians or civil group activists, but to set an objective and to start with some sort of seed. And from that seed, this can lead to the organized structure in the future. One of our very successful projects we started, and this project is up and running, entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. We started with an international conference entitled Social Entrepreneurship, the Vector of Change in the EU. This continued within the Social Entrepreneurship Forum. Today, it brings together more than 200 individuals and companies throughout Slovenia. But this is a completely independent organization. It is not part of our institute. This is our idea. And based on development of the idea, civil society should self-organize itself. And the same goes for the universal basic income. We hope to take it from there, and the same also goes for political foundations. Here I also included how this narrative of social entrepreneurship and cooperatives was kick-started. It now has a life of its own. And also the universal basic income shares a similar story. Now we will make an attempt to improve the level of political foundations. I don't know whether we will be successful or not, but I believe that the time is right, and I hope that we will be able to succeed. So this idea of political foundations will also be included in the Political Funding and Political Party Act. Another aspect, which in my opinion should be highlighted the most, and we should upgrade it further, namely policy analysis. But for that, we need a lot more funding than we currently have available. This is something I will focus on more in the future. I hope that we will be able to find partners, partnership organizations from abroad, also from Slovenia, and that we will be able to succeed in the future. Thank you very much.
Sebastian, dve stvari.
Two things, Sebastian. I heard you mention, amongst the tasks of political foundations, policy analysis. You know that at the Faculty of Social Studies, policy analysis is a subject that has been cancelled. What do you think about that? The Department for Policy Analysis and for Public Administration is one of the rare departments in this part of Central and Eastern Europe that has a very clear long-term vision and follows a very clear educational model and helps us understand public policies, public policy models, and how to enhance knowledge about policies. Year one did not have enough students enrolled, and that is why this program had to be cancelled. Students had to be re-enrolled in other study strands, but I hope this is just a temporary situation, and I hope that another model will be found and that the story will be continued. Policy and science need to meet themselves somewhere in the middle of the way, and this should be also translated to other areas in Central Europe. It's not only a Slovenian matter. It is not bad in itself. That is a good starting point, and I will now raise a question for all of you. You know that in our parliament there is a research office that provides professional support to the parties and to the members of groups of members of parliament. Could this also be the role of political foundations? Could political foundations provide such a professional support and expertise outside of the framework of the parliament? No policy is neutral. When we draw comparisons between political parties and a neutral organization within the parliament, or political foundations and an office within the parliament, we see that an office within the parliament cannot draw conclusions, they cannot adopt decisions, and they cannot come up with political evaluations. But on the other hand, I agree that in politics there is no neutrality, there is no neutral area. Political parties are competitive. They compete amongst each other. So what would I do? I would cancel this office within the parliament, and I would use the funds available for that office to finance the foundations. What do you think, Mr. Burčić? I agree with Sebastian. Social sciences are never neutral. Social economists in the 20th century speak about economy as a neutral science. However, very few adhere to this point of view. Social sciences are based on moral values, and if we take a look at the history, we see that law, politics, and economics are based on evaluations, on moral judgments. So it is useless to pretend that neutral experts working within the parliament could, at the end of the day, propose guidelines that would be neutral. That's an illusion. And here I agree with you. It is much better to have a transparent outsourcing. It is best to be very clear and fair and acknowledge that each of the think tanks will follow a certain ideological strand, but that these different ideologies can enter into a dialogue with each other, and that through this dialogue we can reach improvements and better solutions for our society. But the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption and the Court of Auditors are still convinced that political foundations are criminal associations organized to extract money, extract fundings, but this is not the case when it comes to our organizations. You see that we do not receive much funding, and we always spend the money available with only after careful consideration. What do you think, Mr. Gruden? You have mentioned yourself that expert work is the one that can change political culture. Before each election campaign, we speak about new human resources, about new stuff, new faces. But we would like to see these new faces being well educated, well experienced, while on the other hand, these people don't know what the procedures are, who is who, what is where. Well, we have found out a new funding source in this discussion. I'm not very familiar with the office that you have mentioned within the parliament. I don't know much about its activities, but Dr. Brščić and Mr. Pikl are well acquainted with this office, and I see there is much reserve available still. So this could be a new potential funding for the foundations. So we have the reserves, but when it comes to new faces, we have all lived in an illusion that politics needs new faces. It is just a lesson that we needed to learn. New faces are not enough, and perhaps not every new face is a good one. So how will things happen when the new elections will take place? Political parties in these election fight will probably make a new selection of these new faces. Before, someone used the term when enlisting possible functions for political foundations. He mentioned a very good term. He said political foundations can be training centers. Of course, we may have different images of that, but I think it is a very adequate expression. Mrs. Zattler, and then we'll give the floor to the audience. Thank you. I agree that we need policy analysis. This is indispensable. The parliamentary team focuses primarily on comparative legislative solutions. They conduct statistical analysis that serve as a basis or as a support to legislative drafts, but their domain is relatively narrow, and the scope of their activities is relatively narrow. But we need very good policy analysis that will enable us to take the right decisions. In Slovenia, we don't have a very good basis for legislative decisions when it comes to ex ante foundations and or basis for our legislative work. This could be a very good mission for the political foundations, the preparation of such bases, because it would enable the government and the members of parliament to work in a better way. How to solve the issue of financing, however, is something that should be left to debate. There are several options possible, I'm sure. Right, I will now give the floor to the audience. Please introduce yourselves before taking the floor, and please limit yourself. Well, I was challenged when you mentioned policy analysis and political parties, because these are two issues that I'm dealing with as a professor at the Faculty of Social Studies. Please do not think that we are lost. Our study program has been cancelled, but is not cancelled permanently. What happened at the postgraduate strand. The graduate program is still ongoing. The reason for that was not that there were no students, but that there were not enough students. In these critical times, each study program needs to have a sufficient number of students enrolled in order to receive funding. So this is one of the criticisms. We often hear in Slovenia that many things are evaluated solely through the economic prism, but we mustn't forget that we need to preserve scientific disciplines, even if they are not the most profitable ones. So this is just a correction, so to speak. But I'm very pleased to see many of our graduate students here. Those who graduated in policy analysis and public administration. Now, to go back to the focus of our panel, political foundations and how do we understand their functions and the functions of political parties, on the other hand. I don't want to take a position with regard to the draft act, but if we compare the existing act with the legislation pertaining to political parties in other member states, we can see that our act contains all the basic elements that need to be regulated. The solutions proposed are, of course, slightly different, but they are influenced by the national context, and they are influenced by the consensus within the political parties themselves. In Slovenia, political parties are regarded as organizations, unfortunately, the main purpose of which is to be present at elections, to stand for elections. Each organization taking part in elections is, by default definition, a political party. However, political parties have a number of other missions and a number of other tasks and functions that should be brought to life in a democratic society. And here I see a certain deficit. I don't think that the parties themselves are the sole culprit. What is an issue is socialization, the awareness raising. How we call this issue is a matter of debate. We can say it is a question of political culture, of participatory culture, and so on and so forth. So I think that certain functions of political parties are being forgotten in Slovenia. I don't know who is to blame, but it is an issue that is closely connected to financial means. Whenever I tell my students, can you imagine the funding given to the political parties. Can you imagine these amounts? And when I show them the data, they are all appalled. They say, that much? They get that much? And my subsequent question is, if you want to organize your work, if you want to organize and finance your local organizations, territorial organizations, supporting structures, different fora and interest organizations within your political parties, then you see this amount that the political parties get is not that high. That is the problem. The general perception is that political parties receive a huge amount of money, also because of the bad connotation that they have, the bad reputation. But in actual terms, this amount is not that high. The idea to regulate political foundations in Slovenia is a good one. Political foundations exist anyway, so why not making them legal? Why not acknowledging their status? Because they already are performing their duties. Of course, we must still discuss the framework for political foundations, but we are not well aware of the fact that in Slovenia we need quality decisions. Quality decisions, regardless from which side they come. Without supporting structures, it will be difficult to take quality decisions. And it is difficult to expect quality decisions to be taken by civil servants at different ministries. They have huge administrative burdens to deal with. So I would really like to support this idea of a regulated framework for political foundations. And this will also be in line with the European context. Would anybody like to make a comment to that? Or perhaps raise another issue? Thank you. Goran Forbici from the Center of Non-Governmental Organizations. Undoubtedly, this is a very interesting discussion. Whether or not we need a new type of legal entity to regulate political foundations, well, this is something that we don't fully support. We agree with Mr. Brščić, who says that excessive regulation is not good for us, that we don't need a new act, while on the other hand, the practice also shows that current statutory forms and legal entities do not limit political foundations. Whether they operate as institutes or societies or associations, they are by no means limited in their operations. I don't see any practical problems if they operate under such legal entities, and really don't see the reason why we would need a new legal entity. It was said that the foundation as a legal entity is not the most suitable one for political foundations, because it says in Article 1 of Foundations Act that a foundation is primarily a charity organization. But I think this must be understood in a way that foundations are mainly organizations to implement projects. Umanotera, for instance, is a well-known Slovenian foundation that works in the field of sustainable development, implementing a number of different projects. Our representatives of Slovenian representatives of different Slovenian foundations, political foundations, are now finding common grounds when it comes to funding. This has probably taken place also in Germany or in the US. So I'm not surprised that common ground is being found. It is not surprising. And I understand that new sources of funding should be found for financing of their activities. But to comment on what Mr. Pikal has said, he said that 60 to 90% of funds available to political parties are spent for propaganda and only 10% is used for intellectual work. But is this a systemic problem or a problem of the parties? The system does not prevent the parties to redistribute their funds differently, not to give precedence to populism, but to other issues. Why not employing people who will generate analysis, guidelines, evaluations that should then be followed by the parties? I don't see any problem here. If the parties don't receive earmarked funds for think tank activity, that doesn't mean that they should not or cannot redistribute the funds available to them differently. So for me, it is acceptable to see political parties agree upon a redistribution of their funds. But I think that these should be existing funds, that they should not receive additional funding for the think tank activities, because there could be great misuse of such funds available for political foundations. I don't want to be too long, but our center is convinced that new legislation is not necessary, but that much should be done within the political parties themselves in order to improve their work, in order to improve their reflections and redistribution of funds and tasks and priorities. Think tank activity does not take place only within political foundations. We must acknowledge that. But it takes place within any private organization that deals with policy analysis. They should not be party affiliated. There are many such organizations. And there is great motivation to perform this activity. However, the funding is always a problem. It is the most undernourished activity in Slovenia. Think tank activities and advocacy. We would like to protect different vulnerable groups, but we don't have enough money to analyze policies and to be actively involved in the processes which generate these policies. Thank you very much. These were very interesting thoughts. Another question? It is not a question, it's a comment. Bogdan Biszczak is my name. Is this a problem of the system or political parties, was the question. When the speaker referred to 60 or 90% given to propaganda. This is a systemic problem. If you go running 100 meters, nobody tells you to run. You can walk, but nobody does that. Everybody runs, because the winner is the first to reach the goal. And in a political match, it is the same. If you want to win, then it is an unwritten rule that you will have to run. And these unwritten rules are written by or set by the media. You simply need that amount of money. If you don't use it for that purpose, then you will be lagging behind. That is why the new Political Parties Act and the new act on election campaigns are not the best ones. They could be amended and they could be improved, but this is a pertaining issue when it comes to political parties. Now, on the issue of the new act for political foundations, yes or no, I'm not sure whether we need it or not, but there is no problem until we come to the issue of financing. For the time being, political foundations don't get any money, but as soon as you want to distribute public money to someone, then you need very clear rules. Which foundation can receive this funding? Which conditions must be met beforehand? What is a political foundation in the first place? Is it registered? How must it register itself? And so on and so on. So everything else can be regulated without a new act apart from financing. I'm really skeptical whether we can solve this issue of financing within the next 5 minutes, but let us try. I think the purpose of this roundtable discussion has been met. We have started to actively debate the issue, which wasn't the case up until now. And we need further public discussions to present the arguments for and against. In relation to the share used by political parties for propaganda, I would like to call upon the State Secretary to comment on that. Both acts contain something that is very illogical. On the one hand, we prohibit legal entities to donate to political parties, whereas on the other hand, we allow greater amounts of funds to be spent by political parties. So I think that it is now allowed to the political parties to spend 700,000 euro for political campaigns. So obviously, even less money will be available to think tanks. In 2009, we made a proposal to reduce by half this amount of money allowed to be spent for political campaigns and for the elections. We want to encourage political parties to spend more money on political considerations and reflections. So I think we should really reconsider this upper ceiling for funds spent for political campaigns. We spoke about that today. So the issue is still hot. Some are in favor of this provision. Our attention was drawn to the problem of local elections. These ceilings can be a problem there because the issue at stake there is the number of inhabitants. And if we stop using current regulations, then we can get to very funny situations where political parties will find themselves in very strange situations indeed. So probably we will change this this regulation. Thank you very much for your participation. I think the debate was on a very high level, but we will see. We will continue to monitor the development in this field, and I hope that words will become flesh. It is definitely good to have this topic being discussed in different fora, on different agendas. I hope you've learned something new and that you've received some food for thought. Thank you.